Hey, Facebook family, it's Wednesday, live at 5 with Sergeant Dorsey. Welcome, welcome. A little tardy today, so forgive me for that. Wearing a bunch of hats, right? So I'm going to start off doing what I do, which is setting this up on my other social media sites. And I don't know if you noticed, but I have a fancy new microphone. So can you just give me a thumbs up and let me know if you are able to hear me okay? Barry, I know that you're here. Are you able to hear me, sir? Can you let me know if you're able to hear me okay? Going to be sharing this around the internet. So I'd like for you to do the same thing. Share this as you come on. Share this on your timeline so that others can see what we're going to be talking about today. And hashtag tell a friend. So, I know we're getting close to, I know that we're getting close. Thanks, Charles Bennett. You can hear me okay. I know we're getting close to Christmas, right? And I have a wish list, you guys. So if it's not too late for me to get on your Christmas wish list, I'd like to do that today. So what I want for Christmas, y'all. Hey, Aaron. What I want for Christmas is I want subscribers. I want you to share my timeline, my Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, with your friends. Ask them to follow, to like, to subscribe. I want you to share my podcast, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, and my YouTube channel, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks. So go there and sign up, like it, follow it, and tell a friend. Hashtag tell a friend, right? So that's what I want for Christmas. That's simple and easy enough, right? Oh, cool. Okay, you guys can hear me. Great, great. So, listen, I want to talk a little bit about the Sandra Bland documentary. How many of you may have seen the documentary that was on TV the other day about Sandra Bland and, that whole situation? It was really difficult to watch for me because it was so unnecessary, her death. Not that any death is ever appropriate, but, to see someone who's so vibrant, who's got so much going on in their life, and they're looking forward to amazing things to happen, and then to know in a few days that person is not going to be here anymore, to already know how the story ends, made it really hard for me to watch. But I did. I hunkered down and I sat through it, and I listened. I listened as the warden of the jail tried to explain away what was going on in that jail during the hours that preceded her death, and how somehow they being the jail staff, if you will, could speak to her mindset and to try to convince the family that no, she was upset because. And I don't know that they were trying to convince the family, but this is the story that they were trying to weave, is that she was upset. Sandra was upset because the family refused to bail her out. And it wasn't that the family refused to bail her out. They were in the process of getting bail money together. And you understand how difficult that can be, particularly if you're not familiar with the system and a bail bondsman and how that works, and you're in another state trying to negotiate this very important business on the behalf of a family member, with police personnel in another state who may or may not be giving you their full cooperation. We don't know. I don't know. But to try to speak to her mindset and say that, no, she was bothered by some things because her family wasn't coming through like she thought they should have. And when you're locked up and you're confined, sometimes your mind can go in a place that isn't really where you are. To try to sell and weave that storyline was problematic for me. And so understand that the family has been compensated financially. I think it was $1.9 million that they settled with the family. Understanding you can't put a dollar amount on a life of a loved one, but they settled nonetheless. They settled with the family. Brian Insinia, the state trooper who started this foolishness, lost his job. So clearly, without admitting culpability, they're admitting culpability, right? You don't do that if you are strong in your conviction and you really believe that you didn't have anything to do with the person's death, if you will. And we know based on the documentary that there was some foolishness going on with the log that they had to finally admit to, because there were several notations of alleged, I guess, hourly checks or regular checks nonetheless that were being made by the jail staffers. And according to the way the documentary presented the information is that there were entries that were made in advance. They just filled in a bunch of hours and times when they so-called checked on Sandra Bland, and they hadn't checked on Sandra Bland. And we know that they hadn't, because if they had at the times that they said, then that thing that they allege happened could not have happened the way that they reported, based on their requirement and duty to check on the welfare and well-being of people that are in their custody. So that was problematic. And then, of course, they tried to make a big deal about, whatever little bit of marijuana they found in her body. And the family did an independent autopsy that spoke to the fact that, those amounts were not massive. Whatever amount of marijuana they found in her body, it wasn't a big deal. But nonetheless, we see this scenario all the time. They dirty up the victim. They try to present something that somehow makes it plausible that this person, hey, Omar, thanks for joining me. I see you. Thank you. I appreciate you, sir. The fact that there was marijuana in her system, again, would cause her to lose her mind. And listen, I don't smoke weed, and I don't know how many of y'all do, but just tell me, when you smoke a joint, does that make you want to hang yourself? Because I've not heard that marijuana does that to you, particularly in the small amounts that were in Sandra Bland's system. And so that's their story. They're sticking to it. They stuck to it. They paid the family. And fortunately for the family of Sandra Bland, there were some good things that came out of this tragedy, if you will, in that there is something called the Sandra Bland Act, which requires prison personnel to conduct themselves in a way that is very different than the way that they did when Sandra Bland was in custody. They've named a street after her, Sandra Bland Parkway. And some of you who are friends with me on Facebook may have seen when I spoke at Prairie View A&M a few months ago, I was fortunate enough to be taken to the scene where there is a steel tribute memorial in the honor of Sandra Bland. And so I took some pictures of the flowers and the setup that they had there, and I took a picture of the street sign that says Sandra Bland Parkway. So there was some good things, and there was some policy that the senator there, Royce West, was instrumental in getting passed, and that is the Sandra Bland Act. So wish more family members could have those kinds of successes, if you will, or those kind of policy changes when there's a death. Anyway, so, this whole alleged suicide situation with Sandra Bland and the fact that Brian Encinia, we know, lied, and I think he was fired not because of anything that he did when he roughed her up and, pulled her out the car and manhandled her, not for that, but for committing perjury, for lying, for falsifying his reason to put her in that place that she should have never been in the first place, which is what he said she kicked him or she assaulted him. And so they charged her with a felony, which, was kind of a big deal in terms of when she got to the jail. The jailers, once he tagged them, and now they have her, they're looking at her as this hairy, scary black woman who's out there assaulting police officers. And I'm sure that she didn't quiet down. And I've said this before, she didn't quiet down when she got in that jail. And I believe that those people who work there have a symbiotic relationship with Brian Encinia. He brings prisoners there all the time. He knows the jailers. They know him. And I absolutely believe that those jailers finished what Brian Encinia started, because I don't believe that Sandra quieted down, and I think she was punished. And I think that the video where you see officers going into the back with gloves on, in my mind, may speak to that, because anybody who's listening to me right now who happens to be LAPD family, y'all know what happens when we put on gloves, right? Put on black leather gloves, because we don't do surgery or anything, right? And so, when an officer puts on black leather gloves, that means he's about to put in some work. He's about to hand you your ass. He's about to deal with you, much like the officers dealt with Freddie Gray, by their own admission, in the back of that van when they said they were dealing with him. To me, that sounded like they were back there putting in work. And that's why when he finally got to the jail, his spine was severed or whatever they did to him that caused him ultimately to lose his life a few days later. So listen, remember Marlene Pinnock, the lady, the grandmother, the great-grandmother on the Santa Monica Freeway here in Los Angeles, who was straddled by a CHP officer who was wearing what? Black leather gloves, and he was putting in work. He was putting in work. And so that's what police officers do when they put on black leather gloves. Or at least they do it as an intimidation factor. Because listen, I carried black leather gloves in my little back pocket, right? With my SAP, LAPD family. You with me? I carried black leather gloves and I would put them on. But listen, when I joined the LAPD, I was 5'9", 118 pounds. So who was I going to beat up, really? It was an intimidation thing for me. And if me pulling out my little gloves and putting them on my little narrow frame would get you to comply, then that's all I really want you to do. I want you to comply, because in my 20 years on the LAPD, I shot no one. Shot no one, choked no one out. I didn't maim, I didn't harm, I didn't create any great bodily injury to anyone. I talk a lot of mess, but I never had to hurt anyone. And so when I hear them try to minimize them being command staff or wardens of a jail or police chiefs who try to minimize and mitigate bad behavior by ascribing a mindset to someone who's not here to speak on it, like they did with Sandra Bland, it's problematic for me. And that's much like what they did with Shawn Souter. And I said I was going to talk about this because I had a Facebook family ask me what my thoughts were on Shawn Souter. And so for those of you who may not know the Shawn Souter story, what I'm going to do is I am going to add a link on here that speaks to the Shawn Souter, who was a detective in Baltimore. And he was due to testify regarding some other officers who had been involved in, that gun task force there in Baltimore. You know what was going on over there with those officers. I think it was about 8 of them. And so this detective, Shawn Souter, somehow got caught up in that. And he was due to testify. And the day before, guess what? He winds up dead. Why? Because they said he committed suicide. Now, the then police commissioner over there in Baltimore, whose name is Kevin Davis, he said, yeah, no, I'm not buying that whole suicide story. And he also said that it is very difficult. It's very difficult to speak about the state of someone's mind just haphazardly. If you haven't taken the time to talk to the family and people that are close to them to really know, what's going on with them and where they are, it's very difficult to just say, oh, on this day, because he was feeling some kind of way, he committed suicide, or, the inference for Shawn Souter is that he was going to get caught up in that whole gun task force dragnet that was going on, and he had some culpability and some criminality that was going to be ascribed to him as well. And so, of course, when they said that Shawn Souter over there in Baltimore committed suicide, then that created a whole situation for his wife, his widow, who's now trying to collect benefits that would be due to her as a widow, maybe from an insurance company or whatever. And, sometimes insurance companies don't want to pay if you commit suicide. And so they kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone, no pun intended, when they well, I won't say when they shot and killed him, but when Shawn Souter died, right? Because now he can't testify against those 8 officers, some of whom had already been convicted, and some of them had already pled guilty to shenanigans over there in Baltimore. So Shawn Souter's gone. He can't testify. And then you say he committed suicide, which Kevin Davis, the commissioner, said, I'm not buying. And oh, by the way, Kevin Davis, he's no longer there. He got fired because his crime rate was too high, so they say. But anyway, so Kevin Davis said, yeah, I'm not feeling that. I got a problem with that. And very easy to say when someone's not here what their mindset is when you don't know what their mindset is. And so anyway, if you didn't get a chance to see the Sandra Bland documentary and you would like to know more about that story and just to see how it has affected the family and continues to affect the family some years later, please do check it out. I'm sure that they will have it probably air several times in the next, weeks to come. So now that moves me on to my story about Mantic Bradford Jr., the young man that was shot and killed in the River Chase Mall over in Alabama, the good guy with the gun. family had their own autopsy report, and there's been much said about it in the media with regards to he was shot in the back 3 times. A Mantic Bradford Jr. was shot in the back 3 times as he was running away from the chaos, away from the off-duty officer who fired the shot. So that whole thing about, they thought somehow he was involved in the fight. They thought somehow he was, shooting at officers. None of that is true because he was shot 3 times in the back. And, I talked a little bit about this on my podcast, subject hopping, if you will. Stay with me. On my podcast yesterday, I have a new podcast that I put up every Tuesday, right? So on my podcast, I talk about the young man who actually was the bad guy with the gun. He was arrested. So if you want to know more about the young man who actually was involved in the shooting that injured an 18-year-old and a young girl in the River Chase Mall, go to the podcast platform of your choice and listen to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks. It is the episode that dropped on yesterday, December the 4th. Now, on to Amber Geiger. So, yeah, Amber Geiger was indicted. She was indicted on murder, and there's a lot of chatter going on about that, whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. I know in the beginning, people wanted her to be charged with murder. Others were upset that she had been arrested on the manslaughter. A lot of back and forth about, which is easier to prove, murder or manslaughter. For me, it's potato, tomato, tomato. It doesn't matter. In other words, it don't matter because I absolutely believe that Amber Geiger is going to walk. I absolutely believe that. And if you guys, if you're not with me yet, you understand that when they booked her the second time after she was indicted, when they booked her, she was in and out again in record-breaking time. I think her bail was $200,000. She put up the 10%, $20,000, and she was out of there. So she'll be, luxuriating wherever she's hiding out right now for the better part of a year because this thing probably won't go to trial until sometime next year. This time, the end of next year, probably. And by then, everybody will have switched channels, changed reels, will be on to something else. They, police and the media and the likes, they expect us to have short-term memory. And so, there won't be so much excitement and anger next year this time. State of Indiana. What's up, state of Indiana? You guys have a lot of stuff going on. I've talked previously about a young man in Indiana who had some issues with Southport police, I believe there in Indiana. Young man in an apartment complex working on his car, got stopped by a security guard pretending to be the police, and then he called the real police who came over and roughed him up. Jaquan Dean was his name. Well, now they arrested him, and then, of course, they did that thing that they always do when they don't have a reason to arrest you. They arrest you for interfering or resisting, and then they let you go. They drop the charges, and now you got to find an attorney to try to fight that foolishness. And if you have injuries, good luck with that. Medical bills, good luck with that. So now in Elkhart, Indiana, there's foolishness going on over there as well. And over in Elkhart, evidently, there have been a lot of allegations with regards to brutality on the Elkhart Police Department. And even the mayor suspended their police chief amid investigations of police shootings and beatings. And evidently, there was a couple of journalists who got a hold of a police video that showed officers on the Elkhart, Indiana Police Department punching a handcuffed suspect. And when they started reviewing that particular video and looking into other allegations of police brutality, they realized that there's a whole situation going on in Elkhart and that this was not the only incident. Really, this was kind of like the tip of the iceberg over there. And so the South Bend Tribune has an article that speaks to disciplinary matters that are being investigated by that police department and how the police chief would take those disciplinary matters to their independent civilian review board, that place that's supposed to be the watchdog. Well, when the police chief, who the mayor suspended, remember, every police chief serves at the pleasure of a mayor. So the police chief is suspended right now. But anyway, when he was taking these reports over to the independent review board to be reviewed, he was not always being honest. he wasn't always telling the truth about the kind of force that his officers were using. Now, listen, I know some of you are clutching your pearls and you find it hard to believe that the police chief would not be honest with his civilian oversight board. But yeah, Police Chief Ed Windbigler, Windbigler, Ed, Big Ed. Yeah, he was over there lying, not being truthful. And so, of course, if he's not giving the Independent Civilian Review Board the proper information, you understand that when they come with a conclusion, when they have a recommendation, because he's still to decide what ultimately will happen. So when the police chief, kind of doesn't really give all the facts, or when somebody's getting their ass handed to him, and he says that the officers were a little overboard. That's the way he described it. That the officers were just a little overboard in taking this person into custody. Well, then the police review board is probably not going to take issue with that, right? They're not going to take issue with that because they're not getting the full facts. And so if they're not taking issue with that, when the police chief wants to slap them on the hand, or when he wants to just sit them down and have a fireside chat for discipline, why would the officers do anything different? Why not be a little overboard the next time you arrest somebody if you know that you're not going to be dealt with in a real and consequential way? So that's why I have angst with these independent civilian review boards anyway, because they really, they don't have any teeth behind their recommendation. They make it and then that's that. But the mayor is concerned, and the mayor over there in Elkhart, his name is Timothy, Nees. Anyway, the mayor has some issues with Elkhart, and so what he did, because he's trying to do the right thing, sounds like, so what he did was he reported to the Indiana State Police and asked them to take a look-see over there at Elkhart and see what's up with those police officers. And the Indiana State Police said, now, we're over here doing the Lord's work right now. We really don't have time to investigate Elkhart Police Department. Why don't you reach out to the Department of Justice and see? This sounds like really something that the federal people should be looking at. So reach out to DOJ. And, when I say Department of Justice, I'm talking about Granny Sessions. Well, when he was there, but now we got Mr. Potato Head Whitaker over there at the Department of Justice. So you understand, voting has consequences, folks. Voting has consequences, and so little tink put these people over there and part of in a position of authority at the Department of Justice. And so when it comes time for something that we want to be done relative to a use of force or a deadly use of force, they have no appetite. Or when somebody's getting their ass handed to them, right, over there in Elkhart, Indiana, and folks want somebody to look over the shoulder of the Elkhart Police Department, DOJ has no appetite for that. So we got a couple of more years to white knuckle this, hold on, and then we get an opportunity to get this thing right in 2020. So Elkhart Police Department has a situation. They got a history of disproportionate fatal shootings. I don't know what the population is like, but according to this Tribune report, they said that in the past 5-year period, 6 people have been shot and or killed over there in Elkhart. So if you an Elkhart, Indiana family, be good and be safe in Elkhart. On to St. Louis. There are 4 St. Louis Metropolitan Police officers recently who were indicted on federal charges for suspicion of lying to the FBI and using excessive force last year in 2017 during a protest. Now, maybe some of you have seen this on your timeline. There was an undercover police officer, I think he had 22 years on the job, who was undercover, and he was filming the protests, watching to see who may be cutting up or misbehaving in the midst of this protest. And because they didn't know who he was, because these St. Louis Metropolitan Police officers didn't know who he was, guess what? Yeah, they got him. They got him. They messed him up, too. And so now, and they lied about it. And they lied about it in St. Louis. Stop clutching your pearls. Police officers lie. But this time they hurt one of their own. And so now there's a big to-do about that, because these officers were using unjustifiable force during this protest. And in the midst of the investigation, they found out that they were happy to do it. These officers, in their arrogance, were texting one another about, I can't wait for this protest so they can put on them black gloves and do what it is that they do. And plus they had the anonymity of some kind of SWAT uniform or something. I guess it doesn't have a name on it or a badge or a name tag or whatever. So they had anonymity based on this tactical gear that they were wearing during the protest. And they had the audacity to communicate to one another how much fun it was going to be. And so now there are federal charges that are stem from this September 15th, 2017 protest. Now that protest had to do with a police officer by the name of Jason Stockley over there, who's white, and he was responsible for the death of a black man by the name of Anthony Lamar Smith. So that was what the protest was all about. Thankfully, no one died in the midst of the protest, but obviously some folks got hurt. And not only did this 22-year veteran police officer get hurt, you could best believe that some civilians were dealt with in the midst of that protest. And listen, any complaint that they may have made in the midst of that was probably being foo-fooed away, if you will, because that's what police do when citizens complain. And that's why, now when I talk about the kinds of things that we see every day, this is nothing new. This is the kind of stuff that minority and poor white communities have been complaining about, officers being heavy-handed, and nothing is ever done until it makes national attention, until it gets national attention on the news, or until they hurt one of their own who's undercover. Yeah. Then all of a sudden they want to do something different, right? So that's what's going on right now over there in St. Louis. And so there are a couple of officers that were involved in this use of force. Officer by the name of Boone, Hayes, and Myers. And all three of them have been charged with unreasonable force. And then there's a fourth officer, Bailey Coletta, who was charged with trying to cover up the crime. And by covering up, my guess is they mean that he probably lied about the police report that was written, or lied about the use of force report that was written with regards to that. So Police Chief John Hayden over there in St. Louis, yeah, he got some splaining to do. He's got some splaining to do. And even with all of this going on, with the text messages that they have of the officers talking about how excited they were and they couldn't wait to F up some in people, they couldn't wait. The police chief, John Hayden, says, well, listen, that's no way reflective of the hard work and dedication exhibited by the men and women of his department. Well, it seems to be a little reflective, sir, because we've got text messages from them, so I don't know what you're talking about. But, I always say that, when you get a police chief like this who won't admit that stuff's messed up, when they won't admit that there's something broken, then you understand if it's not broken, there's nothing to fix. Hey, John, if it's not broken, then there's nothing to fix. And so while Chief John Hayden over in St. Louis has text messages, racist text messages from his officers saying what they want to do to people that look like me and you, he says that that's no way reflective. And so I'm not really sure that Police Chief John Hayden over there in St. Louis, y'all, really is interested in doing anything different. And so, when you see that officers make a concerted effort to lie and to help one another, that whole, code of silence situation. People ask me, why don't the good cops tell? Because when good cops tell, there's a price to pay. And right now in Chicago, we're seeing what happens to a good police officer who did the right thing in the case of the shooting death of Laquan McDonald. There's a female officer right now who is being dealt with in a real way by her peers over there in Chicago. She's a 17-year veteran, and her name is Dora Fontaine. And right now she's testifying. She has been last week testifying against three of the officers who lied, who conspired to concoct a story that would justify the shooting death of Laquan. Now, we know that Jason Van Dyke was found guilty for the shooting, but there were several officers there who acquiesced and lied with regards to the justification of that deadly force. And so Dora Fontaine is a female officer there who is telling the truth. She's being honest. And as a result of that, she's being ostracized. She's being probably threatened covertly. She has been assigned to the desk. And she's concerned for her safety. So, this is why some officers, and it sounds like she's got a spine, and it sounds like she was prepared to deal with whatever the fallout was going to be when she came forward. And I know that there are many officers who will tell the truth. You don't hear about them unless, it makes it to the news because there's a trial and it's an open setting, and now you see what police departments do. So while all this is going on in Chicago, my question is, what's up with the superintendent over there? What's his name? Eddie Johnson? What's up with him? Because all this stuff is happening on his watch. These are his officers who are intimidating this female officer who's raising her hand and telling the truth under oath about officers on his department lying to justify a deadly shooting that he pretends he didn't think should have happened. I guess that's what he pretends. So how is the superintendent over there in Chicago allowing all this stuff to happen on his watch? How is he allowing this female to be intimidated? How is he allowing this female to not work out in the field for fear of having officers refuse to back her? How are his supervisors, his watch commanders, his lieutenants, his captains, how are they allowing this woman to be treated this way and not step in? Because none of this stuff is happening in a vacuum, and none of this stuff could happen without the superintendent over there knowing. So what's up with that? What's up with that? That just makes me think and believe that the superintendent over there in Chicago, and y'all who live there, you guys say this to me, on social media, that they really aren't interested in doing anything different. They aren't interested in doing anything about the crime, the 50, 60 murders that happens every weekend. And apparently they aren't interested. The superintendent over there isn't interested in doing anything about his rogue officers who threaten and intimidate and retaliate against officers who tell the truth. So anyway, back to these officers that are on trial that Dora is speaking about. It's 3 officers, and that's David March, Thomas Gaffney, and Joseph Walsh. Those are the 3 that are on trial right now for lying about the Laquan McDonald shooting. And so the other thing that's going on with this female officer, in terms of them, first they're treating her poorly at work, and then she's on trial testifying truthfully, and you have the attorney for these 3 officers attacking her, besmirching her character, saying that she's lazy. And I saw a picture of her, and she looks like she's probably kind of a medium stature girl. She's not a waif, put it like that. Okay, so he's saying things that are very unflattering about her in trial. Now, the reason that he's doing this, in my opinion, is because it's a bench trial. I don't think that these male officers would get up in front of a jury that would probably have some women on it and treat this female officer so poorly in front of other women. But they don't have a jury. They have a bench trial, which means it's just a judge. It's just a male judge. And so they are just really saying things that are just very non-complimentary. She's lucky to have a job with good benefits, and she spends all her time at Dunkin' Donuts, or right out of the chute, in other words, right out of roll call, she's off to Dunkin' Donuts. But guess what? She ain't going to Dunkin' Donuts by herself. More than likely, she's over there with a partner, and probably a couple of them. Because when I was on the department, that was the first thing that we did, was we went to go get donuts. And everybody know cops go get donuts, and it wasn't really about the donuts. It was more about the coffee. It was more about the cup of coffee that you wanted to start your night off because it's cold, or because you want to try to stay awake, or whatever. There's a myriad of reasons why we would congregate at a Winchell's, and it wasn't always because we were looking for donuts. But this lady she's getting grief, and she's getting it all the way around, and the superintendent in Chicago is allowing it to be done in his name, as far as I'm concerned. So, listen. The stuff that's going on right now in Chicago and St. Louis, none of this stuff is uncommon. This stuff has been going on for a while, there, here, and everywhere else. And, the reason that I am talking about this is because I want people to understand how difficult it is. And I've said this before based on my own personal situation with regards to speaking out and being a whistleblower, if you will. If you're a police officer, there's no such thing as whistleblower protection. There is no safe place to go. And truthfully, if you work anywhere, there's no safe place to go, because remember, I talked about my own experiences with the Los Angeles Unified School District being a whistleblower, and how then Superintendent Michelle King, a black woman, came after me. And much like Michelle King had 40 people trying to figure out how to fire me for being a whistleblower, over there in Chicago, you know, they had a whole team of people trying to get these officers off based on the lie that they told, rather than investigate the fact that they told the lie. So, you know, this is what large bureaucracies do. This is how they treat people. And Dora Fontaine over there in Chicago is not the first. There was another female by the name of Laura Kubiak. Laura Kubiak over in Chicago is a 29-year veteran, and she was a spokesperson for the department. So that means, you know, she kind of had some clout. She was in a coveted position to be the spokesperson, and she too has a lawsuit against the city of Chicago for the same reasons, because she spoke out truthfully about something, and her trials and tribulations have been going on since 2014. She's been suing the city. She was reassigned to the night shift. She was put in a dangerous neighborhood, probably fearful that officers wouldn't support her and back her if she had a high priority call, right? And so eventually, you know, she went ahead and retired. But her lawsuit is pressing on. And so, again, not unique, not singular to them. Officers were talking to her harshly and threatening her with physical violence. And I know how that can be, because when I was a young probationary officer, I had a training officer. I had only been out of the academy for about maybe 4 or 5 months, and I had a training officer put me in what we call a pain compliance hole. Pain compliance hole. My training officer. His name was Doug Shure. Hey, Doug, because I know some of you out there know him. And, you know, because my God is amazing, somewhere down the road, you know, Doug Shure, he didn't put me in a pain compliance hole. He tried to, but there was another officer in the room who stepped in and said, hey, let her go. Black officer Roselle Shepdog, stepped in and said, let her go. And so I talk about that in my autobiography. I talk about a lot of instances that happened to me that were real in my autobiography, and so I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail about that, but I know that it goes on. And if you want to know a little bit more about the trials and tribulations that I had as a black woman coming on to a predominantly white male police department, go to my website, Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, SGT, CherylDorsey.com, and purchase my book, The Creation of a Manifesto. No, that's not it. That was my first book, The Creation of a Manifesto. But I have a revised edition, which is The Creation of a Social Advocate. Black and blue. While we're talking, why don't I just show you? Black and blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate. So I talk a lot about my LAPD experiences, and I talk about a training officer that I had who put me in a pain compliance hole and was, you know, treat me in a way that I was like, yeah, I'm not here for that. And, you know, there was fallout. You know, I had to deal with some stuff, but, you know, I'm kind of ornery, and I'm the kind of girl, if you tell me no, then I must. So it got real interesting after he put me in that pain compliance hole, and I went and told the lieutenant. Yeah, check it out. So Officer Kubiak, she'd had enough, and she just decided, you know what, I'm out of here, and she retired. So, you know, I talk about these things that go on police departments, and I'm going to wrap it up right now. But, you know, what I always say is if you want to be, if you want there to be change, then you need to be the change. You need to be that difference. I tell young people, join. As much as I say about LAPD and other police departments, you need to be on that police department in order to make a difference, right? And we see examples of people all the time who are incarcerated, and they go, you know, young men, they go to jail, they become their own attorneys, and every now and again one will get out and do amazing things to help other people who were wrongfully convicted, blah, 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 did a lot of time. And there's a young man that I want to mention very briefly. His name is Isaac Wright Jr., and you can Google Isaac Wright Jr. And I guess 50 Cent is about to do a movie of some sort with regards to his story. He was wrongly convicted, went to prison, and was supposed to spend life there. He was wrongfully condemned to life in prison as a drug kingpin, but he acted as his own attorney and represented himself well. And he is the first and only person in the U.S. to be condemned to life in prison, secure his own release and exoneration, and then be granted a license to practice law. I believe he's in New Jersey. So listen, if Isaac Wright Jr., who had spent years, and check him out, Google him, and you'll see that he spent years in prison fighting. He spent years trying to be allowed to take the bar. And even once he took the test and passed and all of that, they were still throwing obstacles and things in his way to prevent him from actually being admitted to the bar there in New Jersey. So he prevailed. He was determined. Yeah, he was the kind of guy, if you tell him no, he must. And so kudos to Isaac Wright Jr. And so where are my other Isaac Wright Jr.'s out there? Get on those police departments and be the change, right? And so to that end, I want to end with some information with regards to a good friend of mine. Her name is Rochelle Belisle, and she is there in Philadelphia. And Rochelle Belisle speaks like I do. We are partners in crime, if you will. She is one of those police officers who tells it like it is, who wants to bring substantive change, concerned about quality of life issues, if you will. And so Rochelle Belisle decided to run for sheriff there in Philadelphia. And she is having her first fundraiser on December the 13th from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And the address is 4128 North Broad Street in Philadelphia. So Google her, go to her website. I believe it's RochelleBelisle.com. Friends of Rochelle Belisle are hosting this first fundraiser, and there's going to be several. I believe the election is next year. So go out and show your support on December the 13th, 6 to 9 p.m. at 4128 North Broad Street in Philadelphia. Rochelle Belisle, B-I-L-A-L, for sheriff. Change is coming, y'all. But we can't do it by ourselves. You got to help us. So until next time, remember what I want for Christmas. Subscribers, tell a friend, like my page, like my podcast, subscribe to my YouTube, and share this on your timeline. So until next time, you guys, be good, be safe. Talk to you next week.